Hmm. I'm trying to. We're going to go ahead and do like that. It wouldn't allow me doing that, but so we'll just keep it like this. We will try to be brief and thorough, guys. If tonight do a brief history like we did for the Iran war when it first began back in February, but this is pertaining to the um. I can't minimize that. They took your votes before, and they're doing it again. So we're gonna do a deep dive into Black voting rights in America, right? Should be about an hour 30 type of session today. If you're here tonight, you already know something serious happened this week, and I want to give you the time and the depth that it deserves. Tonight, it's not going to be a regular live session like we did, right? We're going to sit together. We're going to go through all the way back before the Supreme Court, before the Voting Rights Act, before MLK, before John Lewis, before Selma, right? We're going to start at the beginning because sometimes you cannot understand what happened on the 29th of April. Today's May 2nd without understanding the full 400 years of history that led to it. So it's going to be an educational life, it's going to be historical, it's going to be analytical to the best of my ability, and it's going to be honest, sometimes uncomfortably honest, right? Because that's the only way we can honor the truth, what was lost, and what was taken this week. So I'm going to give you the history blocks. I'm going to stop you if there's any questions in the comment section. I'll try to respond to that. And by the time we're done tonight, you're going to understand not just what the Supreme Court did a couple days ago, the 29th of April, but exactly why it matters, especially to Black voters, right? Exactly who it affects and exactly what Black Americans can do about it right now. If you're finding this channel just now, please be sure to subscribe, hit the bell button, share this live with everyone that you know, with every person who cares about democracy. This conversation deserves, to be in the bigger room. So let's go ahead and build it. Now, before the law, like the long history of Black disenfranchisement, right? So I'm going to start with 2%. In 1965, in Dallas County, Alabama, Black Americans made up more than half of the population. More than 50% of the people living there were Black, and yet only 2% Black voters were registered to vote. And that's not because Black people didn't want to vote, not because Black people didn't try, not because it was something that wasn't in their radar. But the system deliberately, intentionally, violently, I might add, made it impossible. Huh? And I need you to understand that was not a mistake. That was by design. So after the Civil War, the 15th Amendment in 1870, we're gonna start there, right? The war ended in 1865. Over 600,000 Americans died in that war, the bloodiest conflict on American soil history. We know that, right? And when it was over, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, quote unquote, abolished it, right? The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to formerly enslaved people. In 1870, the 15th Amendment was ratified. Now, what does that mean? It said the right of citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the U.S. or senators or any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. On paper, Okay, in 1870, Black men had the right to vote. Black people had the right to vote. In the decades that followed during what the historians call the Reconstruction, Black men voted, so quote unquote. Black men ran for office. Men served in Congress. The Huron Rebels and the Blanche Bruce became the first Black U.S. senators. More than 2,000 Black men held elected positions across the South, right? So then what happened? The backlash came. In 1877, federal troops were withdrawn from the South as part of a political compromise. And without federal protection, the white supremacist forces that had never accepted the outcome of the Civil War moved systematically to take back everything, right? Everything. So they used every tool available to them, guys. Poll taxes. You want to vote? You have to pay. Formerly enslaved people who had been legally barred from earning wages for generations suddenly had to pay to exercise their constitutional right. In the 1900, the poll tax in Texas was about $1.75. Now, when we look at $1.75, that doesn't sound much, right? But in 1900, dollars for a black sharecropper, that was the equivalence of several days of labor. Many simply could not afford it. So then you had the literacy test. You want to vote, you have to pass a reading and comprehension test administered by the white registrar. But here's the thing, that literacy tests in the Jim Crow South, right? They were not standard. The register decided if you passed, and black applicants, regardless of education level, were routinely failed. One famous test in Louisiana asked an applicant to count the numbers of bubbles in a bar of soap. Now, if you're taking a shower, who has the time in a day to count the amount of bubbles that appears in your bar of soap? Let me do it like that. Right? Who? And guess what? The answer was whatever the register decided. Then you had the grandfather clauses. So I gave you what? You had the poll taxes, the literacy test, the grandfather clauses. Some states said that you can vote without paying the poll tax or passing the literacy test. If your grandfather could vote, formerly enslaved grandfathers could not vote by definition, right? Then you have the white primaries in a solidly democratic South. Winning the Democratic Party was winning the election. So Southern states simply said a Democratic Party is a private party event. Black people are not members of this party. They were barred from voting in the only election that basically mattered. Then you go violence. When all the legal tools weren't, enough, I told you guys what they were doing everything they possibly can. They used terror, the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, the white citizens councils, lynching, burning homes and churches, killing black political leaders. The message was simple. If you try to vote, you might get killed. You might die. And it worked. By 1940, only 3% of eligible black voters in the South were registered. 3% from a constitutional right that was granted in 1870 to 3% actually, you can say, exercising it 70 years later. This is within the lifetime of people that are living right now. Because I know sometimes when people think and try to conceptualize like the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, they think it's far. No, 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 no. This is in the lives of people that are living right now, right? Were you taught in school any of this information? Or I feel like when we went to high school, even middle school, like the way that they taught us history made it seem like these incidents, these stories that we're reading in American history are like far has been far, far, far away. But in reality, majority of these atrocities happened not in the far distance at all. Just look at social media. People that were alive in the civil rights era are having um TikTok accounts. Okay? They have TikTok accounts. So it's not something that's been far distance, something that's been here. Then we have Bloody Sunday, the birth of the Voting Rights Act. Let's go to Selma, Alabama, February 1965. A 26-year-old man named Jimmy Lee Jackson attended a civil rights demonstration in a nearby town of Marion. Alabama state troopers attacked the marchers. In the chaos, Jimmy was shot in the stomach by a state trooper while trying to protect his mother, who was being beaten. He died 8 days later. His death and the rage that followed, you can say, sparked a decision to march. Civil rights leaders planned to walk 54 miles from Selma to the state capital of Montgomery to not depend. At that time, Governor George Wallace addressed the systematic denial of Black votes, voting rights in Alabama, right? And in the afternoon, March 7th, 1965, Bloody Sunday, 600 marchers assembled at Brown Chapel AIM Church in Salem. They organized in pairs. They walked in silence down Broad Street towards the Alabama River and Edmund Pettus Bridge. Now, the bridge name, okay, Edmund Pettus, was a Confederate general, a U.S. senator, and a Grand Dragon of Alabama KKK clan. I think I said like 4K. So Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. The marchers were literally crossing the bridge named after the leader of a terrorist organization to demand the right to vote. When in front of the line led by a 25-year-old John Lewis and Williams, they reached the crest of the bridge and looked down the other side. They saw 150 Alabama state troopers, sheriffs, deputies on the horsebacks, white specters on the side of the road waving Confederate flags. Some of those specters were cheering. Major John Cloud raised a bullhorn and ordered the marchers to disperse. He gave them about 2 minutes, and about a minute and a couple seconds later, the troopers charged. They used billy clubs, rubber tubing ropes, and barbed wires, tear gas. Men on horseback rode into the crowd. Women were beaten unconscious. 14-year-old woman named Lydia Blackman Laurie needed 7 stitches above her eye and 28 stitches in the back of her head. Amelia Boynton Robinson, a leading organizer who had been registering Black voters in Salem since the 1930s, was beaten unconscious. A photographer of her lying has been, on the road of Edmond, appeared in front pages of newspapers around the world. Right? Then you have John Lewis, a 24, as you can see in this picture here, suffered a fractured skull. He later said he thought he was going to die that day. He bore the skull, huh? He bore the scars of that skull fracture on his head for the rest of his life. 17 people were hospitalized, 50 were treated for injuries. Then the ABC News that night broadcast of Judgment of Nuremberg, a film about Nazi war crime trials, to air almost they had to stop it to air this full footage of Bloody Sunday on American national audience. People were watching the film about fascism and state violence, then watching state troopers beating unarmed Black Americans on the bridge in Alabama for trying to walk to their state capital. Now, this is nothing new because it's been happening since then and it's still happening right now, right? If we're keeping a buck. Now, some people were able to react from the country, black and white flooded to Selma. Sit-ins and demonstrations erupted in solidarity across the nations. And on the 15th, the president at that time, Lyndon Johnson, addressed a joint session to Congress. He concluded in his speech when he said, "We shall overcome." And August 6th, so this happened in March, okay? 7th. Then on the 15th of March, he made that "we shall overcome" statement. Then on the 6th of August of 1965, so about 5 months after Bloody Sunday, President Johnson signed a Voting Rights Act into law, right? Now, the Voting Rights Act of 65 did several critical things. We're going to break it down. Section 2 banned any voting practice that discriminates on the basis of race nationwide permanently. This section the Supreme Court just gutted April 29th, 2026. Okay? Section 5 required certain states with a documented history of discrimination, including Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Virginia, and Texas, to get federal approval called pre-clearance. Before changing any voting law or procedure, you couldn't move to polling places. You couldn't change registration requirement. You couldn't withdraw a district without federal approval first. Now, then we also something that was called the examiner's provision allowed federal officials to go directly into communities and register black voters, bypassing local registers who had been blocking registration for decades. So within months of this act passage, black voter registration in the South surged dramatically. In Mississippi, black voters registration went from 6.7% to about dang near 60%. So it's 59.8% in just 2 years. So 60 years of systematic exclusion, and within months of federal protection, you could say hundreds of thousands of Black Americans finally exercised a right that held since 1870. John Lewis said it best. He said, President Johnson signed that act, but it was written by the people of Selma. Love it. So, what do you know about Bloody Sunday that most people don't? What are you feeling right now with what just happened on the 29th, right? Let's talk about the long game, because what happened on the 29th of April 2026 did not happen overnight. It is the latest step in of 60-year effort to take back what was won in 1965, you can say. Now, from 1965 to 2013, the Act holds. For the first 48 years of its existence, the voting right was renewed and strengthened by Congress multiple times in 1970, in 75, in 82. In '06, Congress reauthorized the Act for 20 years by a vote of 392 to 33 in the House and 90 to 0 in the Senate, bipartisan, nearly unanimous. George W. Bush signed it into law. For nearly 5 decades, the pre-clearance requirement of Section 5 worked as a shield. States that tried to pass this, discriminatory voting laws had to get federal approval first, and they were denied repeatedly. This is happening as recent of 2006, and we're gonna go into what even happened in um 2013. It's been a battle since the beginning, guys. In 2013, Shelby County versus Holders, the first blow, right? Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion in Shelby County versus Holder. The court ruled 5-4 that formula determining which state needed to pre-clearance was based on outdated data and was therefore unconstitutional. Hmm. Congress could create a new formula, but until it did pre-clear, basically it was the pre-clearance section of Section 5 was effectively suspended. Roberts wrote in that opinion, right? And I want you to hear this very carefully, guys. Our country has changed. He argued that the history of discrimination that justified pre-clearance no longer existed in the same forum. What a lie. What a bowl of lie that was. And is. Because what's happening in 2016, 2026. And then Justice Ruth Rader wrote a devastating dissent. She said, getting rid of pre-clearance because voting discrimination had decreased was like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you weren't getting wet. Within 24 hours of Shelby County ruling, Texas announced a strict voter ID law that had previously been blocked under pre-clearance. North Carolina passed a sweeping restriction on early voting, same-day registration, and out of precinct voting. Alabama closed DMV offices in counties with large Black population, making it harder to get the ID now required to vote. How about that? This is all happening in 2013, guys, by the way. Okay, so Congress was supposed to write a new pre-clearance formula. It never did. Then in 2021, is that like 4 years ago? About to be 5 years ago? they're gonna keep on doing this, never gonna change. Bromwich versus DNC, the second blow. So the first blow was what? The Shelby County versus Holder. Then the second one, that was in 2013. Now 2021. The Supreme Court ruled in Bromwich versus Democratic National Committee, DNC, further weakening Section 2 by making it harder to challenge voting restrictions, even when they had demonstrated, discriminatory effects on minority voters. It's been like this since the beginning, since before 1870. Then in 2026, this year, Louisiana versus Callais, the third blow and the most devastating one, I would say. This is what's historically that we know so far, right? And this is what happened in Louisiana because after the 2020 census, Louisiana redrew its congressional maps. A federal court ruled that the new map violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights because it diluted Black voting power. Black Americans make up approximately one third of Louisiana population, but under the original map, they had meaningful influences in only one of 6 congressional districts. The court ordered Louisiana to draw a new map that included a second majority Black district. Louisiana did. The second district, the sixth district, congressional district, was redrawn. And in 2024, Cleo Fields, a veteran Black Democrat who had not held the seat in Congress for 28 years, was elected from that district. Then a group of white voters sued. They argued that the new map, the one drawn to comply with the Voting Rights Act, was itself unconstitutional racial gerrymandering because race was used in drawing it. Like, huh? Make it make sense. Make it make sense. Then Justice Samuel Alito wrote majority opinion that the ruling says that going forward to successfully challenge a vote map under Section 2, you must prove intentional racial discrimination, not just discriminatory effect. Not just the map makes it, demonstrably harder for Black voters to elect candidates of their choice. You must prove intent. Now, we all know when it comes to law and stuff like that, to prove intent is very hard, right? Now, why that matters so much is election law expert like Rick Hansen of UCLA told NPR directly, proving intent, as we know, as I just said, is hard. Map makers do not write memos saying we're drawing this map to dilute Black voting power. Duh, nobody does. That's like admitting to your wrong. They say we're drawing this map for partisan reasons, and under this ruling, as long as they call it partisan rather than racial, it is protected. And that's what they're doing. And then Justice Elena Keegan, in her dissent, she said, accused the majority of making the changes that eviscerates the law. She said that she would be interested to see whether the gains Black Americans had made a political representation would hold up after the issuance of this opinion. And then Justice Sotomayor said the ruling green lights redistricting plans, sorry, that would allow disabled minority communities. So Section 2 technically still exists, right? Technically. But the election law, scholars say, it now has a shallow shell. You cannot enforce a law that requires you to prove something that is almost impossible to prove, which is intent. So, what part of this do you feel like hits different for you, knowing the full context of this whole April 29th thing that you've been seeing, many, many activists speaking about it on social media? We have the president of NAACP, Derek Johnson, saying today's decision, he's talking about the 29th, is devastating blow to what remains of Voting Rights Act and a license for corrupt politicians who want to rig the system by silencing entire communities. The Supreme Court betrayed Black voters. They betrayed America and they betrayed our democracy. This ruling is a major setback for our nations and threatens to erode the hard won victories far back in 1965 on Bloody Sunday. As John Lewis said, it might have been written in 1965. It might have been written in 1870, but the street of Selma wrote that. And then Reverend Al Sharpton, He said the Supreme Court has not just weakened the law, it has humiliated and dismantled the life works of Dr. MLK, John Lewis, and every man and woman who bled and died for Black Americans to have equal voices at the ballot box, and so many, many other, right? And then we have the House Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries. With this decision in Louisiana versus Callais, the Supreme Court has opened the door to a coordinated attack on Black voters across the country. This is an outright power grab. It's about silencing Black voters, dismantling majority Black districts, and rigging the map so the politicians can choose their voters instead of the other way around. We will not let this scheme get rigged the midterm elections to be successful. And all week we've been hearing people saying some versions of the same thing. Does my vote even matter? They always find a way to take it back, and they sure do. Why should we keep fighting when the system keeps, moving the goalposts? And I'm not going to dismiss that feeling because this is rooted in 400 plus years of documented systematic intentional betrayal, right? But I need something that our people, Black Americans, to understand. Okay, the fact that they keep trying to take your vote away proves that your vote has power. I'll say that again. The fact that these people are trying to take your voting away is proof that your vote has power. Think about it logically, right? If the votes didn't matter, if Black votes did not matter, they would not spend this much energy trying to eliminate them since 1870. Plus, you do not build an entire legal infrastructure over 150 years to suppress something that doesn't, threaten you. You do not pass the poll taxes and literary tests and grandfather clauses and primaries and close DMV offices in Black counties and draw gerrymandered maps and take gerrymander maps and take case after case to the Supreme Court to stop something that doesn't matter. They know what your votes can do. Maya Willie said it directly. Ever since Barack Obama won the presidency, there has been a coordinated rush to power to take away from Black voters because they saw what happens when Black Americans are united in full force. They saw the outcome twice because he was elected twice. They have been trying to prevent it from happening again ever since. Now, what happened on the 29th of April in plain language is before this ruling, if you could show that voting map had this discriminatory effect on Black voters, that made it measurably hard for Black communities to elect candidates of their choice. You could challenge it under Section 2. The effect was enough. After this ruling, you have to prove intent. Get it? Prove intent. You have to prove that the people who drew the map intended to discriminate against Black voters. Now, if they say partisan, we drew this map by partisan, then there's nothing. They're never going to put in their writings, oh, it was this, we drew this map in the racial discrimination. No, it's going to say they call it partisan. They will say they were protecting Republican interests, not suppressing Black interests, even though when those two things are the same thing in the same state at the same time. So what does it mean practically for November 2026? Within hours of the ruling, Florida, I can't speak now. Florida held a special session and passed a new congressional maps. Republican Governor DeSantis signed them. Those maps are designed to flip 4 additional House seats from Democratic to Republican by diluting Black and Latino voting power in previously protected districts, just like they did back in 2021 and 2013. The minute a law was passed, they changed everything. Texas, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, all already redistricted before this ruling to squeeze out Democratic seats. Now other seats can do the same. Now other states can do the same with even less legal risk. So control the House of Representatives and by extension, every piece of legislation, every budget, every oversight function of the government could shift based on maps drawn in the weeks following a Supreme Court ruling that happened 6 months before the election. So April, by November, it'll be 6 months. What can Black Americans do? First, understand what's being targeted and why. They're targeting your congressional representation. They want to reduce the number of Black members of Congress. They want to reduce the numbers of districts where Black voters can elect candidates who represent their interests. That is the specific goal. Secondly, your vote in the statewide and federal races is not affected by this ruling in the same way. Your ability to vote for a senator, governor, president, that has not changed. What changed is the drawing of the congressional district line, which means the fight now shifts to those statewide races. Who controls the governorship? Who controls state legislature? Those are the people who draw the maps. Third, so, John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, House Democratic have committed to passing it. If they retake the majority in November, the bill would restore and modernize pre-clearance requirement that the Supreme Court gutted back in 2013. It could create a new formula because Congress never did the new formula to determine which state needed federal oversight before changing voting laws. Passing that bill requires Democratic control of the House, right? The Democrat control of the House requires you to vote in November 2026. In just about, was not April, and that's May, about 5, 6 months from now. The fourth thing is what you can do. Local elections matter more than ever now. School board, city council, state legislature, county commission. These are the offices that draw maps, that control police department, that set school curricula, right? That decide whether polling place stays open or closes. If you have been sleeping on your local elections, now would be the perfect time to kind of start waking up. The NAACP put it simply in their members call this week. They're willing to do whatever it takes to stop you from having proper representation. That means your vote has power. That means they're afraid of your vote. Don't let them win by staying home. Do your level best. What are you carrying right now? What is your plan for November? What do you need to do, or what do you need to do to make this plan happen? Put it in the comment section after this live is done, or you can just comment on the live, right? So from Bloody Sunday to today, to March, April 29th, I mean, March 7th, 1965, 600 people standing at Brown Cat Chapel in Selma. They walked into pairs in silence. They knew there was a wall of state troopers on the other side. They crossed anyways, right? 5 months later, August 6th, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. And for 61 years, imperfectly, incompletely, with constant battles, the law protected the political power that was brought with blood on that bridge. And then on the 29th of April 2026, 6 judges on the Supreme Court of the United States, none of them who were alive on Bloody Sunday, decided the protection of John Lewis almost died. He died for was no longer necessary in the current form. The Transformative Justice Coalition said it this week. The most conservative Supreme Court since 1935 is setting back the time clock to pre 1965 levels. Here's what I need you to hold on to tonight after this live. John Lewis and many others crossed that bridge knowing what was waiting on the other side. They crossed it anyways. They were beaten, injured. They healed. They came back 3 weeks later. They crossed that bridge again, this time with 25,000 people beside them. And 5 months after that, the law changed. The moment did not stop after Bloody Sunday, it intensified. So this moment calls for the same response, not despair, not withdrawal, not cynicism, intensity. The NAACP said that in their members' call. They're willing to do whatever it takes. We have to be willing to do the same. Your vote is the bridge. Cross it. This is your time. Do everything that you can. Do not get lost in the sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never be afraid to make those noise and get good trouble, necessary trouble, right? So John Lewis said recently, before he died in 2020, that was the statement that I read for you. So what happened on the 29th of April is a call to get into a good trouble. Register people to vote, drive people to the polls in November, run for your school board if you're able to, show up in your city council meetings, challenge act, give money if you can, give time if you can, give your voice, you can. The foot soldiers who crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge didn't have the Supreme Court on their side. They had each other, and they changed the law on the land. You have each other, and you can do it again. So I'm gonna leave you in the thought that Amelia Boynton Robinson, the woman who was beaten unconscious on Bloody Sunday, said, lived to be 104 years old. In 2015, on the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, she crossed the bridge, the Edmund Bridge. Again, she was 103 years old. President Barack Obama held her hand as they walked across that together. She crossed it the first time. Okay, she crossed it the first time in 1965 and nearly died. She crossed it again in 2015 and held the hand of the first Black president of the United States. That is deep. What happened between those two crossings is what happens when people refuse to give up. So do not give up. If you watch any part of this live session tonight, thank you for being here. Subscribe right now if you have not. Hit the bell. Share this recording with everyone that you know in your circle. Share with every person who cares about democracy in your life. Share with young people, especially because this history is theirs to carry. Drop the comment in the comment section. Tell me what you're taking with you tonight. Tell me what you're doing or what you're going to do in November. Tell me what you need to know. We'll be back with any new developing story that will be posted later tonight. Until next time, I leave you all in the care of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.